Money FM 89.3. Best of breakfast. Breakfast Special.
Thanks for joining us on Breakfast Special. I'm Audrey Seek. We are gearing up for GE2025. We've seen fresh candidates working the ground and stepping into the spotlight, with the ruling People's Action Party introducing new faces and the opposition parties also shaping their strategies. Some high-profile moves also making headlines, and there's plenty to talk about. Plus, global developments like the US tariffs are stirring things up, with parties offering very different takes on how it might impact Singaporeans. So what does this all mean for Singapore's upcoming election? To break it all down for us, we've got Dr. Reuben Ng, Assistant Professor at the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy at NUS. Reuben, great to have you with us here in the studio. Thanks so much for joining us this morning.
What a delight to be here. Thanks for having me, Audrey.
It's great to have you. So much to talk about, right? So let's kick things off with the mood on the ground. You know, over the last few weeks, we've seen lots of movement, parties introducing new faces, manifestos being rolled out as we start moving into campaign gear. How would you describe the tempo of this pre-election season so far? Are we seeing anything different compared to past elections?
That's a great question. I think if we compare 2025 with 2020, there are a couple of big differences. In 2020, it was what I would call digital elections, right? Because it was during COVID, we couldn't go out to campaign. But now it's really more a phygital election. There's a digital component as well as a physical component. And if you realize the candidates that had 5 years under their belt, they went through the digital campaigning, but never quite the physical campaigning. So I think it would be quite interesting to see, in spite of that, how they perform, because they'll be doing this for the first time. So I think that's the first difference, the rigor of both a digital and a physical campaign and stuff like that. The other big difference, I think, is demographics. Now, if you remember in 2020, Singapore wasn't quite super aged yet. We were about 17% older adults, 65 years and above. But fast forward 5 years, we are at 20% now. What 20% older adults, 65 years and older, means is that we are now super aged society at the same level as South Korea and Japan, right? So which means that as much as we talk about the importance of young people, new voters, there's this bigger block now when it comes to older adults. So it is just really interesting because I was just looking at the electoral map. Queenstown, which is actually super aged before a lot of constituencies, is about 22.2%, which means they are super aged before the rest of Singapore is, right? And Queenstown is now an SMC, right? So it's a single-member constituency. So I'm beginning to think that aging is going to be on the ballot this year.
Okay, that's something to watch out for sure. I want to get into the latest developments on the tariff front. So we've heard strong warnings from government leaders, right? The PAP being very firm about the messaging. PM Lawrence Wong and others have talked about rough waters ahead and the risk of economic uncertainty, even introducing a new task force. So what are your thoughts on this? Will these global issues maybe favor any party or be something that voters would take into consideration as the GE nears?
You know, what a difference a year makes. In 2024, I think there were rumblings that we might have elections last year. Last year, incumbent parties really faced a lot of headwinds. Right, we saw the Biden administration got booted out, and we saw Macron's government being weakened, right? But fast forward a couple of months later to 2025, now incumbent parties are having so much tailwind. You know, we see what's happening in Canada with PM Mark Carney, PM Albanese in Australia. So incumbent parties are now favoured this year. So last year, I think when Prime Minister Lawrence Wong thought that he may, there were rumblings that he may call the elections last year, but I thought it was, so he decided to postpone it. So I thought it was a strategic masterstroke on hindsight, right? So this year, I think there's going to be a lot of tailwind for incumbent parties. So I think, all things considered, I think it's going to favour the ruling party, the incumbent party, this year in Singapore.
Okay, so let's look on the other side now. Opposition party leaders made headlines for calling the reaction to the tariffs, quote-unquote, overblown. Yeah. Words from the Singapore Democratic Party leader, with the Progress Singapore Party suggesting it's fear-mongering as well. So what's your take on this? Do you see this as a genuine policy disagreement?
That's a great question. I think when it comes to tariffs, let's look at what has been happening so far, right? I think from a macro perspective, it has really affected the mood very negatively. In a short span of time when the tariffs were announced, the STI index dropped 8.5%. And this was almost akin to what happened in COVID and what happened in the last financial crisis in 2009, right? So it's overall really affected the mood. And tariffs do take its toll, especially when it comes to prices, right? The American brands we know and love will now become more expensive because the iPhones that we buy, they import parts from different areas of the world, they send it to Singapore. It's going to be a lot more expensive. So I think there's going to be genuine choppy waters. But I think when we see choppy waters, there are going to be some boats that will rise, some boats will go under, right? So I think it's important to see what potentially the opportunities are. That said, I think we cannot over-prepare for some of these things. So I think the task force that was set up, I think it's a good move. Of course, everyone plays to win, right? The opposition party may say this is fear-mongering and things like that. We don't really know what it is unless we see the full-blown effects of the tariffs. But I think it's absolutely critical that we over-prepare because we are very open to turbulence and winds, and we really have to study the ship to make sure we ride it through.
Yeah. And let's look at messaging from the Workers' Party now, calling for unity and responsible opposition, specifically Pritam Singh. What's your take on how this developing situation has kind of impacted the campaigning for this upcoming GE?
I think the Workers' Party is trying to position itself as a responsible opposition to provide checks and balance. That's always been their narrative so far, and the way he has positioned himself this time fits with that overall narrative of being a responsible opposition. But I think at the end of the day, if we think about how people vote, right, it is not just about all these 30,000 feet sort of issues. Of course, there's now a dark cloud over most parts of the world. But I think we also need to consider things like municipal issues, bread and butter issues, cost of living. So I think as much as they want to be a responsible opposition, tariffs will not be the only deciding factor. There are just so many things that affect how people vote. And the other thing also with regard to how people vote is sometimes people are not just persuaded in the mind. They need to be swayed by the heart, right? So people vote emotively. So I think it will depend not just on the issues, but how you campaign about them. Because notice that this isn't just a digital election, it's a phygital election, right? It's a physical component. So how you sway the crowds at rallies becomes more critical this year compared to the last election in 2020.
Okay, so let's talk new faces now. We've seen several potential candidates from the ruling and opposition parties show up in constituencies. What does the emergence of these new figures suggest? Are we seeing a generational shift or a shift in approach maybe?
So my thought is that, we have a 4G leadership, but I'm not sure if we have a 4G team yet. So I think this is a time where party ranks are refreshed. I think we see PAP reports of over 30 new candidates. A Workers' Party is coming up with an unprecedented number of new candidates, right? So I think this is quite a refresh, really augmenting the 4G leadership with a 4G team and also starting to bring in new members of the potential 5G team, right? So I do think it's a generational shift, bringing a lot of young people, new faces. But you see, therein lies the irony, right? Because actually the larger component of the electorate is now older adults. Right? As I mentioned, Singapore is going to be a super aged population end of the year and next year for sure. How would an older population take to some of these younger candidates? Right? Because, sometimes people vote because, they represent me very much. So I remember the last election, I was living in Sengkang. I have 4 young kids. And at that time, we were also thinking, who represents me? Who looks like me? Right? So I think there's also that element. So that's why 2025, I thought, will be a very interesting election because you are bringing in a generational change, but yet the electorate is become increasingly older.
Okay, something to watch out for. And we've also seen former NMPs resign early and now possibly reappear as PAP's fresh candidates. Some say that this blurs the line, kind of, between independent voices and party politics. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, to be honest, I don't know the NMPs Raj and Harun personally. But my thought is that I don't think they join as an NMP as a route towards party politics. I don't think so. And, Mr. Shanmugam has actually come up to say that, look, it's not unconstitutional for them to do that, right? But because my team does a lot of social media analysis, we have platforms of historical data, platforms of social media, so we are ingesting billions of words all the time from different social media platforms. But when we explored this particular issue, we found that on balance, people are having this bitter aftertaste that this happened. But I think having said that, I do think we need to give space for people to grow and develop. So the NMPs may have, become an NMP. They may have grown in that position. They may have changed their thinking. It may have changed their future orientation, right? So I think we need to be open that may have happened, and they have decided then to take the plunge into party politics.
Okay. And now I want to get into the nitty-gritty. And I know we have so many SMCs and GRCs to look at, but I want to zoom in on Sembawang West SMC. So, of course, now we are looking at possibly a three-cornered fight between the Singapore Democratic Party, and now recent updates show that the National Singapore Party is planning on contesting in the area as well. So how will this impact these opposition parties who are looking to secure seats in this upcoming election then?
Yeah, so I think it's going to be really interesting. I think Sembawang SMC is going to be an interesting hotspot because every time there's a three-corner fight, you see the incumbent or the ruling party being favoured, right? And also because of this tariff gloom, this year, 2025, seemed to have favoured incumbent government. So we see that force, and I think that will be interesting place to watch. I think the other interesting segment of society or segment of Singapore to watch is the sort of Workers' Party stronghold. Right, around Aljunied, Hougang, Sengkang GRC. I think it will be very interesting to watch Jalan Kayu SMC because that's the first time that part, which is famous for roti prata, by the way, very good stuff, is up for grabs now as an SMC, right? So I think, and that is very close to Sengkang GRC. Then, of course, if we go up north, there's Punggol GRC, where the new digital district is, and I think overall, what will be interesting to see will be the hotspots. What will become a hotspot? I think where we have a lot of new B2 flats coming up, new people coming in. So there's a lot of renewal, right? So whenever there's a lot of renewal, people are quite susceptible to being persuaded, because you're going to a new place, you're beginning a new phase of your life, right? So I think that's where people are a little bit more persuadable. From a behavioral science perspective, that's where new habits can be formed, new opinions can be formed. So I would say, in general, I think the hotspots will be those with a lot of renewal, a lot of people moving in and out, because those people are readily persuaded. But the question is whether our politicians are able to persuade emotively as well, right? Because people don't just vote with the mind, they vote with the heart.
Yeah, so you talked about some key battleground constituencies to watch. Are there any areas where we could see a major shakeup or a closer fight than we expected, do you think?
Yeah, I think that is almost $1 billion question.
Yes.
It's very hard to predict. I do think, whether there's a shakeup, I'm not sure, right? Because like I mentioned, the tariff cloud and tariff wind, it's sort of favoring incumbents this year, right? But having said that, I think the other hotspots will be probably West Coast and Jurong West GRC, where the PSP has mentioned they'll sort of field an A-team, right? So I think these will be the more hotspots to watch. This will be more competitive. But whether you'll lead to a shake-up against the tailwinds of incumbency, that really leaves to be seen. That's why it makes 2025 elections so interesting, because every day a new thing may happen, it may shift the winds differently, and this is an election to watch.
This is an election to watch for sure. The road to GE 2025 is already proving to be quite an eventful one, with new faces and global uncertainties shaping the narrative. Reuben, it was great having you on. Thank you so much for joining us on the show today.
Thank you so much, Audrey. I had so much fun.
Thank you. That was Dr. Reuben Ng, Assistant Professor at the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy at NUS. That was your breakfast special on Money FM 89.3.
To listen to more great interviews, download our podcasts at audio.sg or download the audio app. That's AWEDIO, audio at the App Store and Google Play.